welcome to episode 70 of Decision Point. Today we'll be talking to Pastor Paul Denny and everything you wanted to know from a pastor's perspective. And our special guest today is Pastor Paul Denny. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely, Heath. Thanks for having me.
And as we're going through our Decision Point podcast, it hit me one day. I thought, there's so many questions as I talk to Pastor Paul and other people about what the pastor does behind the scenes. And I want to make sure that we in the congregation, we as people of God, know the important role that a pastor is, biblically speaking. Out of Hebrews 13:17 from the New American Standard Version, it reads, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give account, so that they may do this with joy, not groaning, for this would be unhelpful for you." And as a pastor, there's so much groaning, I think, going on in a lot of instances because oftentimes the congregation is not doing what it should be doing for their pastor. And we'll talk about that at the very end. But I had a couple questions here given to me and some we researched, and I wanted to get you the behind the scenes information on what a pastor struggles with and what they do. So Pastor Paul, starting it all off, when did you feel led to become a pastor?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I just want to say kind of from the get-go that being a pastor is not any harder or more difficult than anything else. It certainly has its unique areas that can find its difficulties, but every job is going to face that to some degree. I love being a pastor, and I've been a pastor for almost 30 years now, serving in ministry. And so at this point, I'm getting on up there. But as far as when I felt called to be a pastor, so looking back, I would say that the Lord really began to direct my heart to pastoral ministry in my early teen years. And I came to fully realize when I was 17 that God was leading me into pastoral ministry, and really wasn't, even with my dad being a pastor, I really wasn't sure exactly what that meant for me. But I did share that with my home church on a Sunday morning.
And so when you felt the first calling, if you will, how did that make you feel? Like what went on inside your mind, your heart?
Yeah, it's a weird thing to try to explain or describe to somebody how you know that you're called to ministry, right? And so I kept finding myself in situations where I was asking, how can I do this if I'm going to pastor a church and preach? And then I would even wonder why I was even thinking about that, because I'm a teenager, I'm trying to figure that out. But those things just kept coming back to my mind. Sorry about my phone, Heath. That's part of church life. But anyway, I knew, looking back especially, that the Lord was leading me and guiding me. And I was not ashamed or unwilling. I was just wanted to make sure that was the right calling for my life.
So as you began maybe your first congregational ministry there, what was one thing you wish, or even two, that you wish you would have known before you began as a pastor?
Yeah, when you asked me this question, you kind of gave me this list of things we're going to talk about. Literally could write books on this, right? And so I had been to seminary, I'd been in church my whole life, and still, I think one of the things that I came to grips with very fast was a couple of things. One, God knew that churches needed someone to guide them and shepherd them. Just like a child needs a parent, God gave churches pastors. And it's not always a popular job, not always an easy job, but I do wish this. I wish I had known that sometimes Christians can hurt you pretty bad, and it's not necessarily personal, but it does hurt. And so I had to learn that really quick that I was going to have to toughen up a little bit and learn that even in difficult times, even when people hurt me, they still needed a pastor to love them, guide them, correct them, show grace to them. And so I wish I had known that probably more going into ministry for sure.
Well, as you know, pastors are pretty much a 24-hour day job. So how in your life have you balanced or maintained that balance between your family and ministry?
Yeah, what a great question. And I just answered this with a follow-up, but simply poorly. I feel like every good pastor probably feels like they're struggling and failing in that balance of these two areas because they're so vitally important. Just like a church does need their pastor, a family, God gave a man a family to minister to them first and foremost. Sometimes you have to say no to church activities or church obligations because there's things that just come in your family life that you've got to prioritize. And then other times it's the minister's family that gets the short end of the stick, and probably more often than not. And I thank God for my family. They recognize that. They don't always like it, but there's been times when we have had to, Amber and I have had to postpone anniversary outings and things like that because funerals and weddings, and we're happy to do that. But you got to do a pretty good job of balancing. And I don't know that I've figured that out perfectly, just to be honest.
For pastors you speak to, of course, you've had many years, 30 years, you've said, to know pastors, communicate with other ones. You have a lot of friends that are pastors. So generally speaking, the ones you've talked to, including yourself, what things do you see that pastors generally lack in?
Yeah, that's a great question without exposing all my complete failures. And I would say of both of myself and others that I visit with on a regular basis. Prayer life, just like any other Christian, something that you've got to just prioritize. And you can lack in that very quickly if you're not careful, because you do have so many things going on in life. At the same time, I would just say this, that every successful pastor that you see down through history had a very healthy prayer life. Mm-hmm. And so you got to prioritize that. And I do see that and hear about that lacking in pastors. Also, I would say personal devotional life, apart from just sermon prep. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time at the desk studying for sermons, and I love that. But at the same time, also just for personal growth and growing with the Lord, I would say that you need to make sure that you don't lack in those areas. And then really the third thing that I would say probably most pastors are lacking in, that's just good friendships. They just don't have good friendships. I love my church, and I've got some great men in our church that I can, they pour into me and I love them. But at the same time, you probably need some friendships outside of your church, and maybe other pastors, maybe they know what you're going through, and you can kind of vent to them or get some direction from them. And I'll just be honest, most pastors do not have that.
Kind of turning it around a little bit, what about from the congregants? In general, don't speak about your current church, don't make anyone mad, yeah. But what do you see lacking in most congregants?
Yeah, I think things that over the 27, 28 years of being in ministry, that is certainly concerning to me is the lack of spiritual growth that we see just across the board, not specifically in my church right now or anything like that, but spiritual growth. But that's also then connected to Bible knowledge. Probably in America today, we have the least amount of biblical knowledge that we've ever had. We have more available to us, but we have a very complacent, apathetic attitude when it comes to the Word of God. And I think then that is also a domino effect. Then we see our churches as a whole then struggling in that area as well.
All right, well, let's get a little more light-humored here. Over those many years, you've spoken and been at different ministry levels. What are some of the funnier or stranger things that have happened during an actual church service?
Yeah, I've been in church literally my entire life. I can't remember a time not being there. So you get serious things, you get funny things. Sometimes it was serious at the moment, and then it's funny later. Just a couple quick ones. I was pastoring a church in East Texas, and we had some men that were serving as the greeters and also kind of as security at the same time. That's how smaller churches, you kind of get doubled up on that. And through the foyer doors, it's a glass window there. And so while I'm preaching, I'm watching this guy, and she's a huge guy. He's probably 6'6", 500 pounds, and he's kind of running around in the back while I'm preaching. And you got to finish your sermon. Nobody else sees it. And when we get done, I walk back there and I said, man, what were you doing? He said, there was a snake in here. And just watching this huge guy jump around. And I said, well, did you get it out? He said, I did. And I said, where'd it go? He didn't know where it went. But then I just thought all these people are going to leave and there's going to be a snake somewhere. But so you have stuff like that. Right after Amber and I got married, I was serving as a youth minister, and one of the pastor there, Brother Don, he was preaching this sermon, and we had 4 rows of pews, and so it's kind of in a fan shape, and so you could almost see everybody, just the way the church was set up. And so we were sitting there, and the sermon had started, and everything was going fine. And then one of the older ladies just falls over in the pew. And so a couple of men run over, and they're checking on her. And then they bust out the double doors, and they call 911. An ambulance comes. EMT's coming with a stretcher. And they put this lady on the stretcher. The whole time, Brother Don's just preaching. I mean, he's just preaching the whole time. They bust out, they're hitting these double doors. They're busting out. And there wasn't a person in the whole church paying attention. But he got finished preaching, had an invitation, everything just like it was normal. And we got done with that service the next day. We were in the office, and he's like, "Man, if I could go back and change something, I would definitely have just stopped the service at that point." And so, obviously, it was serious at the moment, but you look back and you go, "Man, I'm glad that didn't happen to me." So,
all right. Well, speaking of funny things, aside from ministering in a church, of course, you have a ministry in nursing home and visitation in multiple areas, right? So, what about those areas? What are some funny things you've seen happen in those? Arenas?
Like I do. We do at our church. We do, and in fact, you're a part of them. We have 2 nursing homes that we go to every week, and it's one of my great joys going to these places because they genuinely appreciate us being there. They listen, they participate. And but every now and then you'll get somebody in there and maybe their mind's slipping a little bit or whatever, and so there's just no telling what they'll say, what they'll do, and you always have to be ready for those things, right? You cannot have a nursing home service without being ready to make adjustments, and so we've had that a few times. I was playing on the piano one day, just picking it out. I can't play piano, but I was playing piano before everybody got there, and this man walks out of his room, and he wanted to know who was playing his piano, and he was not happy, and he used a bunch of language that was not good at all. And the nurse comes in, and he let her know he was fixing to wear me out. I mean, and for no reason whatsoever, but he was just very, very unhappy. And so you have things like that, and man, but I absolutely love the nursing home services. And part of that is because you just don't know. Another time we had a lady come in, and I always ask, are there any prayer concerns or anything? Hey, can we pray for you about anything? And one lady raises her hand, and she says, "Somebody has my teeth, and I want them back." And she was serious, and it was so awesome. And I don't know if she ever got them back, to be honest, but stuff like that always happens literally almost every week in a nursing home service. So
I got to add one on this one. When I was younger, we had a ministry at our church also in Oklahoma, and there was a slow motion chase, if you will. One lady walked by in her wheelchair and bumped another man who got upset. He had a cane in there. I mean, they were like barely crawling across that floor. He was chased to come back here, and she was just running away in super slow motion. It was so funny. We're playing music and singing at the time. We're just watching the whole thing go down and laughing, and funny things happen.
Absolutely.
I love them. Coming back to our congregants here, not necessarily our congregants, but what are some of the, I guess kind of in a funny vein maybe, but the least biblical or spiritual problems you've had to deal with in your congregation?
Yeah, I don't know. You're going to have problems. As long as you're dealing with people, you're going to have problems, right? And to be honest, very few doctrinal issues have come up in my ministry. I just, we just go to the Bible. This is what the Bible says. And few people will really buck that. But you have issues every now and then. You'll have families get upset with other families. We've had people within our church sue other people. And that's that is a biblical issue at that point. Right. But you had to navigate that. As far as just problems or issues, we've had people answer phones during the church and upset people. The music's not right, and that upsets people. Right before I got up to preach one Sunday, I had somebody come up as far as a non-scriptural problem, and they told me that there was no toilet paper in the restroom, and as though I was needed to handle that. And so you never know what the mindset of people are, and so. I would say you're going to have a lot of those little things, and they might frustrate you in the moment, and you got to let go of them and kind of go on. And you'll have other things that are a little bit bigger that you got to address.
What about weddings and funerals? Now, I've only done one of each at this point. That I did. So what are some of the best things and worst things about performing weddings and funerals? All
right, let me start with funerals, because that's what that's kind of how I wanted to answer this question. Funerals for me are actually easier than weddings. At a funeral, the loved ones are grieving, and I simply try to do 3 things. That doesn't matter what funeral. It doesn't matter the age or the circumstance. One of the great nuggets that I brought home from seminary one day that's just stuck with me, and I use it every service in a funeral, is to edify the dead, comfort the living, and preach the gospel. Whether it's a child, whether it's a 90-year-old individual, that you're going to try to do those 3 things no matter what. Find something good to say about somebody, comfort those that are there, but then point them as fast as you can to Jesus. And so funerals, of course, people are high on emotion, and we've dealt with difficult things with family and tensions there. but mostly that's my focus with funerals. The other is weddings, though, and I love weddings, and man, what an honor it is when you have, especially in our church, we've got, we've got younger families, and we got couples that got married, and at this point in my season here of ministry, I've watched couples get married, and they're having kids, and they're raising their families, and so I get to be a part of that, and that is amazing. But the wedding itself can also be a pretty stressful thing, because so many people have expectations and have opinions, and whether it's a mom or a mother-in-law or a best friend or a sister. And what I do every single time, I try to get them to understand, one, this is not the perfect day. You can't have, there's not a perfect day. It might rain, it might be 20, it might be 100, whatever it is. It's not about having the perfect day. But if at all possible, I also try to make everybody understand that this wedding is for two people. It's for the bride and it's for the groom. And to be honest, I tell the groom, it's really for the bride, right? Whatever she wants. And so I said, you can do whatever you want. There's very few rules when it comes to weddings and or funerals. And so I try to make everybody understand this is their day. Let them choose what they want to do. Kind of set the tone and then back them up on that. And I've had very few issues running into to that situation, running into it like that or looking at it like that.
That's good. All right. So what about from your deacons and leaders in your church that are going to serve the people and teach and minister there? Are there any pet peeves that you've had over the years that you wish this didn't happen or you should do this better?
All right. And so the answer that I'm going to give there is yes.
Yeah. End of question. End of answer.
Yeah. You're working, again, deacons and leaders they're sinners just like I am. And you try to navigate that. I'm going to be honest, I've had some great deacons and some great leaders. In fact, our church is full of great deacons. Man, they're just servants. The leaders in our church they're amazing. And then I've had other deacons that probably, I inherited some of them, in different churches and things like that. And they're good men. May not have known exactly what their role of a deacon was. And that falls back on the pastor in churches, right? And so they still tried to navigate that. So what you got to do is recognize that, one, I don't have all the answers, and they don't have all the answers, and it doesn't even matter ultimately as you're working through that. You try to really seek, what does God want, and everybody then gets on board. But I think I will just stay away from giving you any stories or pet peeves of deacons and leaders in churches. How about that?
That sounds good to me. All right. Well, what about two more questions here?
Yeah.
Is there anything you wish that you could say to address a problem but didn't?
Yeah, I mean, and I wasn't exactly sure on how to answer that question, but I would say every week there's always issues. Some are little, some are big, some are growing, and you really try to navigate, when do I need to say something? Does something need to be said? Can this get worked out on its own? So sure, I would say probably every week I look back on Monday or whatever day it might be, and I wish maybe I'd handled something better. I wish I'd left something alone. You kind of can stir something up every now and then. Sometimes I wish I had dealt with something more directly. And that is a continuing learning process, probably for every leader, certainly every pastor, because every situation is unique, and so you want to deal with it the best you can. You look back, and you find yourself going, man, evaluation is important, but it can also be very painful.
And the last question here is, what is something or some things that you wish your congregation was aware of in your life or ministry life, personal life, that could make your ministry more effective?
Yeah, our church here at 2nd Avenue where I serve, they've just treated us, me and my family, like royalty. They've been great to us. And even with that, there are a few things always that you'd want them to know and other congregations to know. But probably number one, I'm a human and I have faults. I'm going to fail. And there's not a perfect pastor. There never has been. Jesus was the only sinless leader. But Paul had weaknesses. Peter had weaknesses. And I have weaknesses. And there's areas that I know that I have weaknesses. And if we were to make a list of things you don't like about me, I'm going to have a much longer list, okay? And so I know that I have weak areas. And so just recognize a lot of grace needs to go into that. If a guy's at a church and he's preaching and he's loving his people, he's not going to be able to visit everybody. He's not going to be able to do everything. He's not going to preach the greatest sermon every service. And you just have to have some grace there. I would say that. I wish the congregation would know that. And again, I think our congregation does that very well. Second thing I would say is they need to know that I'm not a mind reader. And if there's a concern or if there's a need, to speak up, to let me know, or, to help me along the way. And so if there's something I can help with, let me know. Let me know even how to help. There are people in our church that they don't want me at their house. It's not that they don't want me there. They don't need me to visit. They don't want me to visit. They're busy in life. At 5, 6 o'clock at night, they want to eat dinner with their family and they don't need me. And if they do need me, they'll call me. But then there's other congregants that they want those visits and they want to see their pastor and they want to talk and get to know him more. And I heard something a while back that really stuck with me. And they're talking about what should a pastor get ready to do and going into ministry. And it was a podcast, and I don't remember exactly where it was from, but he said be ready to drink a lot of coffee. Just pouring into people, and so you got to know when and how to do that, and so I'm trying to figure that out along the way too.
Well, that's the end of the questions that we had. For any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, I would just say this. I do. I love being a pastor, just like everybody in any job. I've had days when I thought, well, I do not want to do this anymore, and this is miserable, but I always come back to a couple things, and one, I know God called me to this, and so it's not up for me. It's not for me to just quit and go do something else. I don't have that privilege. Should I want to do that? I want to serve Jesus, and if He wants me to be a pastor now and moves me to something else later, that's His right, and I'm willing to do whatever He wants. I hope I'm wise enough to see that, but it's a privilege to serve as a pastor.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Pastor Paul. And I just want to let people know out there, I hope this podcast reaches those. I know hopefully there are some maybe future ministers, future leaders in the church listening. Don't know of any pastors at this time, but if there are, I hope it's an encouragement to you. I hope you remember that our pastors are on the front line dealing with so many major, minor, and issues that are irrelevant to ministry in some cases that they have to deal with. And a lot of these pertain to governing and leading of the church and the spiritual needs, and some just don't. But we have to understand, like Pastor Paul said, have grace, understand they're not perfect, but at the same time, understand that our needs of the congregant are not always priority number one. There's so many things they're dealing with that if you feel like you're pushed aside, most likely you're not. There's just so many other things going on that pastors deal with. And we need to be in continual prayer for them in every way, every time we pray for our church and for the leaders. And so quickly as we left, here's a list that Pastor Paul and I came up with, things that we can pray for our pastor. Number one, that they get strength and energy to perform the task that God has called them to perform. Number two, that God's direction in their ministry and in their family is clearly led, and that they can hear that with wisdom and understand what God's leading them to do. For their family specifically, as Pastor Paul mentioned, sometimes families are put on the back burner for ministry, but they understand, but they're also seen as part of the ministry. Number four, they focus, it needs to remain on God, even though they have other things going on, that God is the center. Number five, wisdom to increase in their lives in the ministry. And finally, that He be encouraged, and that we can be a part of that encouragement as it goes on. So once again, Pastor Paul, thank you for joining us and answering all these questions, taking your time to stop by.
Absolutely. Thanks, Heath, so much. I enjoy it every time I get a chance to come and visit with you.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing you next time on the next Decision Point. God bless.